Hi and welcome to this video where I'm now going to refit the subframe back onto the Mini R50. Now in last week's video it was all about replacing these control arm bushes, which I've done now on each side, and ironically while I was doing that I also noticed that the lower engine mount bush has also got a tear in it. Now that I am expecting is an MOT failure item. So what I'll also do in this video is to inject some silicone sealant into this, and normally once that's solidified it normally works quite well, and hopefully that would make it pass an MOT on that item. So once this is back on the car, all I've got to do is put the aluminium bumper carrier back on, the bumper, the wheel arch liners and the wheels, and then hopefully the Mini will be ready for an MOT and hopefully she'll pass. So hopefully you'll enjoy this video, and many thanks for watching.
So it might be worth just having a look at a couple of overview photographs of the subframe and the components. So if we start with this photograph where we're looking towards the front of the car, so that's as if we are in the driver's or passenger seat looking forward. And then if we add some labels, we can now see all the different socket sizes and the torque wrench settings for most of the fasteners on the subframe. And then if we turn the subframe around now, so we're looking from the front onwards, we can see most of the items regarding the steering, and we can see the anti-roll bar there, and also we can see the two control arms on either side that go to the bottom of the front wheels. So before doing anything else, I best remove and repair that failed lower engine mount bush. You can buy these for about £40, I believe. So let's have a look at this failed bush. So as we can see there, that's definitely failed, and will allow the engine to move around quite considerably if you were to do some harsh accelerating. So what I'll do is I'll just remove this. It's a 16mm socket, and we just pop this bolt out. So these are quite tight, they're about 100 Newton meters when you go to put them back in. So there's our bush. So what I'll do now is give that a little bit of a clean up and try and key the surface. So if I just show again there using a tyre lever, that has completely come away from the outer part of the bush. So what I'll do is I'll just use like a circular file just to try and roughen the surface up, so that hopefully when I come to inject it with silicone it will actually have something to sort of get a purchase onto. I'll also give this a bit of a clean as well. So I'm going to just use a bit of car brake cleaner here, because that evaporates quite quickly, which is quite useful when it's about 0 degrees outside and most things don't seem to be evaporating anymore, but thankfully this does. Okay, so we're opening a new tube of silicone sealant. This is just your normal regular no nonsense. So let's see if we can pack this up. I'll inject from the middle outwards to make sure it's definitely full. Don't want any air gaps in there. Now I have done this on the other Mini and it was quite successful. So if anything it probably makes the mount considerably stronger or less flexible. But it definitely does hold it quite well. So there we are, injecting down there until it comes out. And then again here. Like I say, once this actually hardens, it's pretty rigid. So it's probably a little bit more rigid than the original. There we go. So what I'll do now is just pop that into the kitchen onto a cool but warm radiator and leave that overnight. Okay then, so now to refit the subframe. Okay, so what I'll do is to try and tip this onto the trolley jack. Like so. You sort of need it on the head. I actually pushed it further back, which actually made it more awkward. So you do really want it on the head of the trolley jack, so as you jack it up it doesn't come back on an angle. So we've got to get that power steering reservoir located into the correct part of the back of the engine. So make sure that's going up correctly, and then we can gradually lift the whole subframe into position. It does take a little bit of fiddling around. Again, this would be a lot easier if you had two people, because somebody could be up top just confirming the location of the reservoir bottle and making sure it doesn't get stuck on anything. So I've got to sort of try and feed it in from the top and at the same time try and sort of jack up slightly to make sure it's all going in the right place. So it's looking correct. So I've got two locating dowels on the wheel arch part, which I'm going to have to locate first with the subframe. So our reservoir bottle's in position. So we should be able to go down now and look at the locating dowels. Just shifting it over there. So there's the locating dowel. So if we start with this part first, because that obviously can only go in one place. So I'll get this into position on each side. Might need to use your feet there as well, just give yourself a hand or give yourself a foot. Once that's in, now I'm just going to put a little bit of light 3-in-1 oil on these bolts. Notice that the actual two bolts there do need to be replaced and shouldn't be reused. I believe they're stretch bolts. So anyway, so I'll get these are quite long bolts, these ones. So I think they're the same length as the two bolts that are used on the crush tubes on the front of the car. And then I'll get one in on the other side. So that means the subframe is at least in position. And hopefully it won't fall down on me when I go underneath the car. So these bolts would be done up last once all the others have been done, and like I said, they should be new, and because you've got to do an angle tighten on those of 90 degrees, and that normally means it's a stretch bolt when you do an angle tighten. Okay, so I should better just let the trolley jack go now, and it's sort of hanging on there and hopefully won't fall down. So we just get these other 6 bolts in on the 2 pads that go underneath the driver's and passenger front seats. So I'll spin those on with a 16mm socket, like so. Now what you might find just before doing this, you could have perhaps connected the power steering connectors, which would be a little bit easier while the subframe was still halfway down. But anyway. Right, so now to connect the power steering electrical connectors. So like I say, these would be easier if the subframe was just slightly down. But it made it a bit harder for me trying to make a video at the same time. Because obviously I needed to be underneath with the cameras. So I couldn't really have a trolley jack there. But yeah, so we've got the main power cable there, which we need to connect, which you might find access easier from the inner wheel arch. It's quite a big cable, that one. And there is a little clip on there. So make sure that one's fully seated, like that. And then we've got the signal cable, which is a lot smaller. And that just pops on there. Now there is a couple of plastic cable retaining clips. I'll try and zoom in there to show. And they just push through on the power steering motor bracket, like that. Okay, so now to torque the 10 bolts that are in so far. Okay, so torque wrench is now set to 100 Newton meters, and I'll start with the 2 inner wheel arch ones where they have the locating dowel. So you might need an extension here, might be a little bit easier. So we'll just take that up and get those tightened to that 100 Newton meters. There's our click, and just pop over to the other side and do the same. There we are, just by the gearbox. Right, and then I'll go to the back of the car and I'll do the 6 bolts at the back on the 2 pads, as it were. And then on the other side, this is the driver's side here in the UK. And then we've got the 2 control bush bolts, which are tightened to 59 Newton meters and also an angle turn of 90 degrees. Now these bolts technically must be new, because I believe they stretch when you do the 90 degree turn. So we get the 59, there it is, and now we need to do the angle. So looking at the clock face, my wrench is there about 4 o'clock, so it'd be turning it from 4 o'clock to 7 o'clock to give us that 90 degrees. And then on the other side, again 59 Newton meters, like so. And then my bar is again about 4 o'clock there, so I'll tighten that to about 7 o'clock, like so. Okay then, so now to refit the steering universal joint to the steering rack, and a new nut should be used here. So it's quite awkward to get into this. So what we need to do is, my alignment marks are still in position with the yellow paint. So there's our eccentric bolt, which is obviously designed so it can't rotate. And there is a bit of oil on that. I'm not quite sure how there's oil on that, but you probably don't want oil on this particular bolt, because you definitely don't want it coming undone. So what I found was, using a positive drive screwdriver, I could just bring that joint together so that it was all nicely lined up. So then the eccentric bolt would go through, and then I gave it a slight little tap with a punch, like so. And then I was able to get my little nut on the other side. Now that nut does need to be replaced, it needs to be a new nut, and then you can tighten that with a 13mm socket. So it is quite tight in there actually to try and do that up. So setting the torque wrench to 22 Newton meters, I decided to try and make life a little bit easier by turning the steering. So if I just turn it like that, we have better access to that nut now. So we just pop our torque wrench in there and tighten the new nut, like so. There we go. So hopefully that is secure and won't come off. I'll just straighten the steering now, like so. Okay then, now we can refit the lower engine mount. Okay then, so let's have a look at this mount now that the silicone has had overnight to dry. And as we can see, that looks pretty secure now. So I think that should actually do the job quite nicely. Obviously, the final person to decide on that will be the MOT tester, who will either pass it or fail it. Now getting this in is quite awkward. So we'll pop these 2 bolts out. So what I found was that if I use my knee, my left knee, I was able to actually push the engine forward enough to actually get this just in. It wasn't easy,
But you know, I'm not.
but I was able to just about do it. There we go. Have a little rest. Okay, so then we can put our 2 bolts back in. Like so, a little bit of fiddling there on the one that goes to the sump bracket. And then these are 16mm sockets and tightened to 100 Newton meters. We just finished tightening those. There we are. Let's get the torque wrench, set it to 100, and just make sure those are nice and tight. There's one click, and just the second one. Come on. There it is. Right then, so we can now go on to refit the power steering fluid reservoir and refill with the fluid. Okay then, so there's our bracket. Now technically BMW do say that these nuts should be replaced because obviously they're the nylon locking type, so in theory once you've used it once it's not going to be as locking next time because you've already worn your groove into it. So let's pop our bracket back on there, slide that into position, put our new nuts on like so, and then with a 10mm socket we just pinch those up, and technically the torque setting would be 8 Newton meters. That's one, and the second one. So then I'm just going to use a pair of plumber's water pump pliers there just to pinch that bracket together, so help me get that nut on, which again is a new nut, and that one is tightened to 6 Newton meters. Like so. So then what we can do is refill the container with the power steering fluid that we took out earlier. So I believe this is Dexron 2. So it would never hurt actually to put clean fluid in. Wouldn't do it any harm. But anyway, so that's the old fluid back in there. Pop the cap on. That's that part done. So now we can go on to refitting the control arm outer ball joints. Again, new nuts must be used. Okay then, so with my bottle jack at the ready, which does seem to make life easier, so I'm just going to make sure that's nice and clean and make sure there's no bits of dust in there, so that the ball joint can sit in nice and firmly, like so. So this is a new nut, and then what I tend to use is just use a bottle jack just to put the pressure on to stop that bolt thread from revolving, like so. And then we can get a 18mm socket, just tighten that up a bit, and then we can set the torque wrench to 56 Newton meters, and then just torque that new nut into place. And just get rid of our bottle jack, and there we are. That should be alright there. Well, it turns backwards and forwards, so it must be fine. And then just pop onto the other side and basically repeat the same procedure. Check it's clear, drop it in. That might be an MOT fail there. I think there's a slight split in that ball joint boot, so that may be something the MOT will pick me up on. Be quite interesting to find out. Let's just jack that arm up. At least it should be easy to take off if it does fail on that. So 18mm socket again, and 56 Newton meters. that into place. So yeah, those should be new nuts. Just check that wibbles. Yeah, it's wibbles and wobbles quite nicely. Right then, so we can then go on to the refitting of the anti-roll bar and the track rod end on the left passenger side, which is in the UK. Right, so I'll do both of these items while I've got all the cameras set up. So this is our stabilizer, or the drop link, which then goes into the stabilizer bar or the anti-roll bar. So you do need an Allen key there, 5mm, and again a new nut must be used. So obviously if you don't hold the bolt with the Allen key, it's just going to keep spinning around and you're going to get nowhere. So we do need that Allen key. Just pop that in there like so, and then we should be able to torque, or tighten should I say, tighten that up without too much of a problem. Might get the Allen key stuck though, but there we are. Right, so this is tightened to 56 Newton meters, and you may find a crow's foot makes life a bit easier, but remember it has to be at right angles, otherwise you will effectively be tightening it more than it should be. So always make sure it's at right angles, so otherwise you'll actually be making the torque wrench longer, so you'll get more leverage. So pop it back round to 90 degrees, like so. Not quite. No, it's not going to click. You have to do it again. Spin it around. So this one should be the click. There we are. So that's that one. Okay, so then got that stuck in there. I had to use sort of like a crowbar just to get my Allen key back. So then we need to do the steering. So this is the track rod end. Again, this can be held with a 5mm Allen key, and the nut should be a new one. So I'm just going to move the steering wheel just to try and push this out a bit further to give us more access. So this is now a 15mm spanner. Again, that's just going to spin around. I mean, you could actually put the bottle jack underneath this and it would probably still be quite effective at holding it. But technically, you've got the Allen key slot there in the thread, so you may as well use it. And then this one's tightened to 52 Newton meters, slightly less than the anti-roll bar. Again there we're at 90 degrees. Should be one more there. We can just get that on there. Camera's in the way a bit. It's not always easy with all the cameras right next to everything. There we are. So we just take the steering back the other way now. So we can go on to the other side now and refit the anti-roll bar and track rod end on the right hand side, which is the drivers in the UK. So obviously very similar procedure to what we've just done. Well, actually exactly the same procedure. Got some different camera angles now, so you might be able to see things in a different light. So again, new nuts. So using our spanner there, 16mm spanner, and the 5mm hex key. Tighten that up. And then we just get our torque wrench. Again, set to 56 Newton meters. Access is a little bit easier on this side. There we go. Got our click straight away. That's good. Just showing there it's still at 90 degrees. So now just onto the track rod end. Dodge all the cameras and lights. So I'll just adjust that steering to give me more space so that the other camera can see a little bit clearer. So pop that in. So again, use a new nut. And that's a 15mm spanner and the 5mm hex key as per the other side. And then 52 Newton meters again. Like so. Got slightly better camera angles on this one, so hopefully you can see things a bit clearer. Okay, I think that's the subframe on now. So here's some reference photographs which you can pause to view for longer. So we'll start off here showing the subframe with all the bolts. So here you can see the different types of bolts that are used in the subframe and the length of them, and like that one there with the washer on, which should be replaced. These three are all the same length. So that's the one for the wheel arch that goes on the dowel, and those are the two for the crush tubes that we'll fit later on. And there is the crush tube, like so, with the two bolts. And there's the universal joint for the steering with that pinch bolt, and that's the subframe mounting point for the bottom of the engine. And there's the engine mounts that hopefully will pass an MOT. Time will tell. So, you've been watching refitting a mini subframe on a Mini R57. Thank you for watching, and I hope this video helps you refit your subframe on your car. This video was filmed and edited by me, Mark Savage, in December 2021, and I can be found on Instagram and Facebook as Coats and Gators.